Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Glad you could make it. And tonight we're delving in much more detail on the gut-brain connection. And there's more to come on the gut-brain connection next week, but we're going to begin to get into some of the nuts and bolts of it. But before we begin, we'll bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to study. I pray that you would give us wisdom and that clarity. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Well, we're going to begin by looking at the oldest study in recorded history. Medical historians have gone through, they've looked for what is the oldest scientific study they can find, and this is what they've come to the conclusion of. This is in a journal called Perspectives in Clinical Research, and the title of this historical medical research is Evolution of Clinical Research. Basically, they're trying to look at where did historical research come from, and this is the oldest study they could find. They tell us that in 562 BC, the world's first clinical trial is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Bible. Now that's pretty fascinating, that the oldest study they can find is in the Bible. And what's that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And you may know the study in Daniel. It's Daniel chapter 1. We're not going to go into great detail, but just a little quick overview. Daniel was a young Hebrew boy, and he was taken captive. King Nebuchadnezzar sent his army. They surrounded the city of Babylon. They ended up taking some of the educated, some of the princes of these young people. They took them back to Babylon and put them through a 3-year educational system, Daniel chapter 1 tells us. So Daniel was there, and while Daniel was there, he was going through different temptations. They changed his name to Belteshazzar, and they named him his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but those weren't their names originally. They were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those were their Hebrew names, but they were changed to kind of the Babylonian god names. And so here they were in this situation. And it's interesting, it says, one of the temptations Daniel went through, it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, the king wanted to give them the best food that he could, and so he figured, well, just like most cultures would imagine, the best food would be the best meat possible. And so, but the text tells us in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. And so Daniel and his friends chose not to eat the king's meat. And what did he do? Well, he asked, let's do a test to see what happens to our health. Because their fear was, if you don't eat this meat, you're going to become very unhealthy. And so we see in verse 12, it says, test your servants, Daniel said, for 10 days. Let's do a 10-day test. And let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, what is pulse? Pulse are things that are grown from seeds. So Daniel and his friends, strangely enough, chose to go on a plant-based diet, not eat any of the meat. And what ended up happening at the end of this time period, it says in verse 20, it says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And so Daniel and his friends, what they ate evidently impacted their cognition. It actually enhanced their cognition. The first study we know of in human history is a study of the gut-brain connection. Now I'm going to show you a video clip from a documentary that my wife and I made a number of years ago called Ancient Health. And the first man on here is John McDougall. He's historically one of the most popular medical professionals helping people reverse diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. So we'll see if I can get the right audio here.
But the main thing that folks should be concerned about is how long you live and how likely you are to get disease. And there have been 3 major studies published on this subject, big meta-analyses. And these meta-analyses, and only 3 big ones have been published, they show consistently that low-carb diets, in other words, low plant food diets, high animal food diets, consistently they show that they're associated with more heart disease and more death, more mortality.
If you look around the world and you look at these people in the blue zones, The average percentage of calories from carbs ranges from about 50% to about 80%. Carbs are not the enemy. Refined carbs are the enemy.
There have been a number of recent studies. Dr. Beeshold out of Phoenix, Arizona, first she did an observational study showing that plant-based diet actually significantly improves your depression and anxiety stress score. It's called a DASS score.
So the mood actually is improved when you get the right amount of carbohydrates, but also the right type of carbohydrates and less protein.
Then she followed up with an interventional study, and that's where she took people who are not on a plant-based diet and put them on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks. She also put them on a plant-based diet plus fish for 2 weeks to see which one would be superior. And it turned out the fish diet wasn't any more superior than the carnivore diet. But the plant-based diet, significant, dramatic changes, statistically significant changes in just 2 weeks in their mental ability.
We see when people go on this diet and drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest, follow these natural remedies, that it's just like something snaps in their brain, and it doesn't take like weeks or months.
Plant-based diet is key in our program for depression and anxiety recovery. The results are outstanding because it's a comprehensive approach, not just diet. We also utilize exercise, and we're utilizing correct thoughts and a lot of different modalities. But the diet is a key element.
I went on a plant-based diet about 5 weeks ago.
It's amazing because even if they had not told me he had the diet change, the first thing I noticed was he was bringing his schoolwork in.
And my teacher has actually been bragging on how much better I've been behaving since I've been on the diet.
In class, he wasn't getting as distracted, that he was paying attention. He was able to listen more closely. He was being alert. His discernment was better. He was more diligent, everything.
I can pay attention more. My mind is more clear since I've been on the diet.
It's just a huge improvement. And I also noticed he lost a lot of weight. But the main things I noticed was behavioral.
A study in a middle school has showed clearly that switching the menu from animal source to plant source diet almost eliminated absenteeism, increased and enhanced attention and homework performance and performance at school. It almost eliminated acts of violence as well as teen pregnancies.
And so they just feel better. Everywhere the blood flows, everywhere that perfect circulation goes, they feel better. Not just in body, but in mind. Clears up their thoughts even.
And every single day since I've been on a plant-based diet, the clarity continues to increase and my face continues to look younger, and my body feels like I look more vibrant. I've looked at pictures of myself before and after, and I look 5 years older, even just 10 months ago, than I do now.
What we eat does get turned into neurotransmitters. It actually helps us or hurts us, depending on what we're eating in regards to our brain chemistry. And it plays a vital role in health of the brain.
They'll say within 3 or 4 days they seem to have clarity. They're alert. They listen in class better. They absorb more, and they do better on their tests.
The fog has been lifted out of my head. I think clearer. I've got better ideas, I believe. I can put 2 and 2 together faster. And just in general, I'm happy.
In fact, diet alone, studies show that diet alone will reduce your depression and anxiety scores by half just by dramatically changing your diet to a plant-based. And so that's significant. Now, we go for more than just half, and so that's why we have a whole program that includes more than this. But just the diet alone will make a big difference.
You don't have to choose between high-quality living and longevity. It's the same program. The same New Start approach to living helps you live longer, and it helps you live better.
All right. This is not working.
No, you're going to have to.
Okay. Wasn't that interesting? The fact that you have something from the Bible. Remember, the oldest scientific study is found in the Word of God. That Chad showed us that they look to see, for those that just came in, they look to see what's the oldest study in the world's the world's history. And the oldest scientific study is found in the book of Daniel, where Daniel and his friends go on a plant-based diet, and then it affects their minds. Right? They do really well on the tests and in every way possible. And what makes something scientific is that you can replicate it, right? And makes it true is that you can replicate it over and over. 2,500 years later, we're still able to replicate that study and show that in schools that have troubled teens, they put them on this plant-based diet, and what happens to them? Violence comes down, teen pregnancy comes down, their studies go up. Amazing, is it not? And even today, you could try something like that, and it has the same effect. And so this is all the gut-brain connection. The first scientific study in recorded history has to do with the gut-brain connection. Another thing is in Lamentations 1:20. This is something they understood. Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled. Did they understand that connection? Yes, they did. And another one, Jeremiah 4:19 says, my bowels, I am pained at my very heart. So this whole thing with our bowels and affecting our mind has been something that has happened for a long time. Now, approximately 90, Chad had mentioned this the first night, but just to repeat it, approximately 90% of the information traveling from between the gut and the brain goes through the vagus nerve, and 90% of it is coming from the gut to the brain instead of the other way around. So your gut is telling your brain more than your brain is telling your gut. So it makes a difference what we do to these guts, right? So we want to understand this a little more and how we can keep it healthy so that we keep our minds healthy. Scientists have discovered that a high-fat diet leads to depressive, anxious symptoms in mice. And it also promotes inflammation in the body. And we talked about that a little bit last night, but we're going to share some other things. So they had a study where they had these mice, one on a high-fat diet, one group, and another group on a regular fat diet. And what they found is that the high-fat diet mice exhibited behaviors like anxiety and impaired memory and repetitive behaviors and inflammation as well. So that's what the high-fat diet mice exhibited. But the regular fat diet mice did not exhibit these behaviors until they took the microbes from the guts of the high-fat diet mice and transplanted them into the regular fat diet mice. And guess what happened? The regular fat diet mice then, from those microbes being transplanted, exhibited these same behaviors: anxiety, impaired memory, repetitive behaviors, and inflammation. When you have inflammation in the body, you tend to have these characteristics of repetitive behaviors, like going over the same negative thoughts over and over and over. And then your memory is affected as well. And we saw that the first night. Chad talked about how the vagus nerve, if you sever it, it affects your memory. And then also the anxiety that comes with that. So we're going to look into these things a little more as we go. But this is just to start understanding how important the microbiome is to our health and to our mental health in particular. This is something from a book called Child Guidance, and it says eating too frequently, too much, and of rich. What would be rich? Fat and sugar. Like rich is like a refined food. You've removed the fiber. So eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of what? The digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, right? The opposite of calm would be anxious, right? Preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. So you could see here that if we're eating too frequently, remember we said, what was the study we shared yesterday about how many meals? The study with 2 meals instead of 6 meals, right? And how the 2 meals actually ended up being better for you than the 6 meals. So you can see here, eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food, it destroys the healthy action of the bowels. And this one's interesting. It cannot be too often repeated. This is the same book. That whatever is taken into the stomach affects not only the body, but ultimately the mind as well. And this is what science is showing us. It is difficult. This is so important here. It is difficult and often well nigh impossible for one who is intemperate in diet to exercise what? Patience and self-control. So when we're not temperate in our diet, it's hard to have self-control. And this is actually a biblical concept. In 2 Peter 1, 5, and 6, it says, it's like a stepping stone. Add to your faith virtue. And to virtue comes what? Knowledge. And after knowledge comes what? Temperance. Okay, so temperance is an older word for like self-control. And having balance in our life, not overdoing things. And so after temperance, what comes after temperance in this? Patience. And so is it easy to have patience when you're not temperate? No, it's not easy to have patience. And a lot of times we'll be praying, Lord, give me patience, give me patience. And we just think it's supposed to like automatically, like, I just have this magical patience come over me. But here, it's telling us that in order to have patience, you need temperance because that's how these bodies work best, right? If I stay up all night, am I very patient the next day? No. If I eat things that upset my stomach, will I be patient the next day? No, most likely we will not. If anything, we're going to need more prayer, right? But another thing about this, the gut microbes, this is very interesting. So what happens is when you eat the high fiber, right? Well, before I say that, high fat and high sugar and all these foods, they're refined because the fiber has been taken away. And the bad gut bacteria, they like more refined foods. That's just what they thrive on. But the good gut bacteria, they like fiber. And when you eat high fiber foods, like the fruit and vegetable world and the grains, you will have more fiber, but also you'll have the bacteria on those foods that you need, right? So you eat it and you chew it up and your body's not able on its own to digest the fiber. But there's something in your gut that does it for you. And what do you think that is? The microbes. The microbes love the fiber. They eat it up, they digest it, and they give a byproduct. And the byproduct is short-chain fatty acids. Those are wonderful to have. And what do short-chain fatty acids do for us? They decrease inflammation. And that was one of the problems with the high fat. It causes inflammation in our guts and causes inflammation in our bodies. And so if you want to decrease inflammation, you need to give yourself more fiber. And as you feed your good gut bacteria, they give you off short-chain fatty acids. They decrease inflammation, which then makes you a happier person. Does that make sense? It's profound, really. But again, it just goes back to the Adventist diet that God gave us originally, right? It's the one that keeps us in the happiest state of our lives, is having more fiber. Because the animal kingdom doesn't have fiber in it, right? It doesn't have fiber. Look at this, Scientific American. It's talking about think twice, how the guts, they're calling it second brain, influences mood and well-being. It's talking about how our gut influences our brain. And it says here, the second brain informs our state of mind in other more obscure ways as well. A big part of our emotions are probably influenced by the nerves in our gut, Mayer says. Butterflies in the stomach, signaling in the gut as part of the physiological stress response, Gershon says, is but one example. Although gastrointestinal or GI turmoil can sour one's moods, everyday emotional well-being may rely on the messages from the brain below to the brain above. It's that much of a connection that they're calling it the second brain. But it says that it can sour your mood. Having issues in your gut can sour your mood. And this is from a book called Counsels on Diet and Foods. And it says people who have a sour stomach are very often of a what? Sour disposition. It says everything seems to be contrary to them, and they are inclined to be peevish and irritable. Peevish is an old word for, and the definition of it is being easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. Have any of us been peevish before?
No.
I can tell you my husband and I, we spend a lot of time together, and there's times where we're peevish, especially on unimportant things. Like, why did you do that like that, you know? And so, yeah, we can be peevish and irritable. If we would have peace amongst ourselves, we should give more thought than we do to having what? A peaceful stomach. You want a peaceful mind? You need to think about it. 2/3 of your immune system is found in your gut. Remember, we also showed people who are C-section babies, because they didn't go through the birth canal and get inoculated by their mother's gut bacteria, or by the mother's bacteria. They didn't get inoculated when they went through the birth canal. Then they come out with not having all their immunity, because 2/3 of your immunity is found in your gut, right? That's the bacteria making area. And so they found that these babies, they followed them. There's like over 2 million babies. They followed them for 35 years. And those that were C-section babies had higher rates of like allergies, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, gut issues, and leukemia. And so it just shows you that your gut health is very important to your immune system as well. That's why you think about it when you go overseas and you travel, and your immunity goes down because you have a lack of sleep. You have jet lag, right? So you're more susceptible to any kind of bug that comes along because your immunity's down. And so then one of the things that happens is you'll eat something and it immediately affects your gut, right? So just something to think about. But what's interesting is that they're also finding, not just like I told you the list of things with the C-section babies, but other kids, they're seeing a surprising link between gut germs and toddlers' tantrums. How interesting, huh? So in this study, they found that if a child had a greater diversity of good gut bacteria, they were more outgoing and social and friendly. And then the opposite was true with kids who had a less diversity of good gut bacteria, were more antisocial and withdrawn and have tantrums, and they saw so now once we learn this, when we meet like a little 3-year-old, they'll come up to us, "Hi, my name is so and so," and we're like, wow, that kid's got good gut bacteria. They're just so open and friendly, and it's just so different, right? So just something to think about. If you have a child in your family that's struggling in this way, you may want to think about replenishing their gut bacteria. And we're going to talk about how can you do that. So
you can keep going.
Yeah. So if you want a good ratio of good bacteria in your gut, what should you do? That's a perfectly good question, because we just saw how important it is to our mental health. Here it says a study, plant-based diet leads to healthier microbiome. So a plant-based diet, like we've been talking about, helps you have a healthier gut. It's just the way it was, right? Right from the beginning, God created the world, and in Genesis 1:29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food. So this is the food that God gave us. And when Adam and Eve were in the garden, what was the name of the garden? Eden. Do you know what the name Eden means? It means the garden of pleasure. And so you would deduct that if God put Adam and Eve in a garden and told them to eat this food, it would be the food that would keep their pleasure, right? That would enhance their pleasure. And so sure enough, now science is showing us that that type of diet, high fiber diet, does give you the most pleasure and keeps you the happiest, right? This is interesting. You can't see it. Sorry about that. It's a Bulgarian Journal of Plant Physiology. And what they discovered is that there's animal neurotransmitter substances in plants. And so not only do you have the fiber that the gut bacteria love, but now you have actual phytochemicals, like chemicals that your brain needs within these plant foods. And so this is what we need, right? We need all these types of chemicals to keep our minds healthy. But one thing is that because, especially in the U.S., we have so many things to distract us from the simple life, right? We want everything stimulating, right? Our food is stimulating, our drinks are stimulating, everything is stimulating. And so what happens is you start to lack the nutrition that you need in order to feel happy and healthy. And then you revert to other things to make you feel happy, right? And to make you feel stimulated. And some of these things are things like alcohol. And what they found in alcoholism and lacking gut bacteria. How interesting. It's a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it revealed an imbalance of the gut bacteria. This was a small study of 60 alcoholics. 24 had lower levels of bacteria in their guts. Okay, so they had lower level. After 19 days alcohol-free, so they made them abstain from alcohol for 19 days, those with the lower levels of bacteria had high levels of anxious feeling, depression, and desire for alcohol. Does that make sense? The ones that had lower level of good bacteria had a higher level of anxious feelings, depression, and desire for alcohol. The 36 participants with better gut flora were doing better. So you see here, it plays a role not only in anxiety and depression and all that, but also in our cravings, right? In our addictions. That if we had a better gut flora and also had enough nutrition, then we would less likely look for stimulating foods or stimulating drinks to make us feel happy. And yeah, but of course, alcohol is a temporary boost, but then there's a corresponding depression that comes with it, right? It's not a way to live. Look at here. Fruit and vegetables may help combat drug addiction. So this is something that they're seeing, that it can combat drug addiction. This is from a book. Again, we said it Counsels on Diet and Foods. It says, in our medical institutions, clear instruction should be given in regard to temperance. The patient should be shown the evil of intoxicating liquor and the blessing of total abstinence. They should be asked to discard the things that have ruined their health. And the place of these things should be supplied with what? An abundance of fruit. Fruit. Oranges, lemons, prunes, peaches, and many other varieties can be obtained. The Lord's world is productive if painstaking effort is put forth. So again, fruit can combat drug addiction. This is from the University of Queensland in Australia, and it's a study that says fruit, a depression buster for women. Isn't that awesome? It's for men too. But this study, they did it on women. They did it on women. And you know what's really cool about this is, who doesn't like fruit? Anyone want to admit to that? I haven't met very many people that don't like fruit. It's just something we naturally like. And so it's such a blessing that it gives us more happiness that we eat it, you know, because we always think like, in order to get healthy, I got to eat the nastiest food ever. And it's just something I'm not going to like. But it's like, you can get healthy eating good stuff, right? So, yeah. This is interesting. Depression and fruit treatment. And in this, it says depression is a common mood disorder affecting sleep, appetite, and libido, and is also one of the manifestations of dementia and may lead to suicide attempts, particularly with violent methods. So this is severe depression, right? And in this, they decided that they were going to put people on a fruit diet. And over there it says there are some high content sources of serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan. Again, like that Bulgarian journal showed, that there's these phytochemicals or neurotransmitters in particular in plant foods. And these are some of them that we need, that you can find them. It says which can provide the body with these substances. These include plantains, pineapples, bananas, kiwis, plums, tomatoes for serotonin, and it goes on and on. But what we're seeing is that whether it's for addiction, whether it's for child tantrums, or for major depression, whatever the case may be, or if you just want your kid to do better in school, right? Like we saw, there's nothing better, right? It doesn't cost a lot. Yeah.
It says that cottage cheese is good.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things mentioned in there, but yeah, we just try to do the best we can, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So happiness and fruit. So this is interesting. This is called Many Apples a Day Keep the Blues Away. This is another study. And in this is from the British Journal of Health Psychology. And they didn't just give them apples, but the point was that the more fruits and vegetables that you ate, the happier you would be, and it would keep depression away. And then this one is really interesting because we want to know, well, how much? Like, where's the limit, right? How much can you eat? And so this is from the American Journal of Public Health. And in this study, they found this is like your happiness, your life satisfaction, and then this is how many servings of fruit or vegetables you have in a day. And so if you eat none, you're the most unhappy, okay? But if you increase it, if you just do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 or 8, and it just kept going up. 8 servings of fruit or vegetables, it just kept going up. And what was cool is it didn't just affect today, but it would forecast how well you'd feel tomorrow. Because remember, the gut bacteria are still doing their work, right? The neurotransmitters are being released and everything, and you're starting to feel good. But the gut bacteria are doing their work, and they're going to give you those short-chain fatty acids, decrease inflammation. And inflammation is a marker for depression, right? As well as other lifestyle diseases, but for depression. And so if you want to decrease your depression, you have to decrease inflammation in your body. And food is one of the ways, but also we said a little bit about it yesterday. You got to know about your environment too, because sometimes your environment could be causing inflammation in your body. For example, mold in the house. Mold is a big issue today. It's causing all kinds of issues, and people aren't realizing how serious it is. So you need to think about that. If you're having memory issues, arthritic pain, asthma, all kinds of, look into, is my house moldy? Yep.
How do we test that?
There are companies that can come in, like abatement companies or environmental companies, and you look it up, and they'll come and check your house and actually check to see if you have mold. And some you don't even have to have them come to your house. You could just, there's kits that you order, and then you do the swabs and put them in and then send it off, and then they'll do the testing for you. Yeah. So this is what's the,
Want me to come up?
yeah, I'm going to have Chad come up right now. Thank you.
All right. So what is the microbiome? The microbiome is not only the bacterial diversity, but the genetic diversity of the living organisms in your gut. Not only in your gut, actually, we have a microbiome on our skin. They say that there are more cells in our body that are not of us, that are bacteria, than our own human cells. So there's more bacteria in us than there are normal human cells. But so the bacterial diversity, the microbial diversity in your gut is called your microbiome. And what do we see here? The University of California, San Diego, reports on the largest human study on the microbiome. It turns out that people who consume more than 30 different plants per week have the greatest diversity of bacteria in their guts compared to those who ate less than 10 different plants. Now you might think, who can eat 30 different plants in a week? Well, it's not as hard as you may think. One time my wife and I, you know how you can buy these salads, the greens in a box that are all pre-washed, you can just open it up and eat it or whatever. One of the boxes, not all of them, but one of the boxes we were eating, I just counted because there's the list on the front. What are in there, like Lola Rosa, lettuce, spinach, kale, whatever. And I counted, and there were 13 or 14 in one box. So you're getting almost half of your 30 in a week in one meal. So it's not as hard as you may think. And then if you at that same meal, I mean, who eats just a salad for a meal? I mean, I don't actually, but, you'd have maybe some potatoes or sweet potatoes or other food mixed with it. And so, now I'm not suggesting you try to get 30 in a meal or even 15. Actually, generally your digestion is better when you don't have a massive diversity at one meal. Many people will have gut trouble when you have a massive diversity at one meal. It's better to mix it up. One meal you'll have, 3, 4, 5 things. Next meal you have 3, 4, 5 different things. But over the course of a week, it can be very easy to get that diversity in. It's not as hard as it sounds. Now, there's something called dyspepsia. Dyspepsia is indigestion and uncomfortableness after a meal. It also, the old-fashioned definition is dyspepsia is of or having indigestion or consequent irritability and depression. So gut troubles and kind of making you irritable and potentially depressed. And we are told for a dyspeptic stomach, you may place upon your tables fruit of various kinds, but not too many at one meal. You don't want to overdo the amount. But it also would be well for us to do less cooking and eat more fruit in its natural state. Let us eat freely of fresh grapes, apples, peaches, oranges, blackberries, and all other kinds of fruit which can be obtained. And so eating in diversity, I mean, we just bought some, I think, on the way over here. I bought an apple. I've only had it one time. I like trying new varieties of apples. And so Trader Joe's had something called Ruby Frost. And so maybe you've never had it, but it's nice to try different things because now here's the thing that when you have an apple, Fadia mentioned the bacterial diversity. An apple, researchers have discovered, may have 100 million bacteria in or on that apple. So you might think, okay, I'll never eat an apple again then, right? But no, it turns out those bacteria are beneficial for you. And what those bacteria, not the bacteria itself, but the apple, not only does it have the bacteria, but it also has, as she mentioned, the fiber. And the bacteria eat the fiber because you can't digest fiber. But the bacteria in your gut can digest the fiber. They actually consume it, as Fadia said, and they give you that short-chain fatty acids, and that helps lower inflammation in the body. So getting that diversity is so very important. But yes, when I fully changed my diet to this diet we're talking about, I had given up on running. I love to run. I love to exercise, but I gave up on running because my joints hurt. And but when I switched to this diet of a high fruit, completely plants, my knee pain went away. And I was 35 when I made the change to this, and my energy just skyrocketed. I felt like running all the time. My knees didn't hurt anymore. My depression went away, and I'll talk more about that, actually, part of my personal experience here. That we had lived overseas. We had lived in a couple different countries around the world, and we came down with stomach trouble. And I had stomach trouble for 11 years. And I lost around 30 pounds, and I wasn't real big beforehand. And to lose 30 pounds when you're relatively thin is a ton of weight. It wasn't a good thing. I was gaunt, and I just couldn't, food didn't stay in very well because I had the stomach trouble. And I also had, along with that, depression, but I had no clue that the depression was connected to the gut problem. I really didn't know that. I didn't know about the research on the gut-brain connection. So, went through this for years, and then I had somewhat seasonal depression and sometimes year-round chronic depression. And then we were down in Tennessee or Missouri, I don't remember, but we were looking at land and we were walking on some property and, got bit by a tick. And one of my doctor friends, she said, hey, I'll give you some antibiotics, some doxycycline. You can take this, it'll help make sure you don't get Lyme disease. And so, okay, sure, I'll take it. And then I went into full-blown year-round depression. And I didn't know about the research back then, but every time you take an antibiotic, it increases your chances of being depressed by about 25%. And every 2 to 5 times you take an antibiotic will increase your risk of depression by roughly 50%. Now think about, just guess, after what you've heard tonight, why do you think, what do antibiotics kill?
Bacteria.
Bacteria. Do they only kill bad bacteria? Yeah, it's like a shotgun. A shotgun, just kind of just shoots. It just spreads out. It's not like a pistol. It's not like a rifle with just a normal bullet. That bullet's going to hit one target typically. But a shotgun, has several different little balls in there, and they just, and that's kind of what antibiotics do. They don't kill one thing. They just kind of like scatter shot. And so what they found is that every time you take antibiotics, it kills off about a third of the bacteria within your gut, within your microbiome. And so I didn't realize that was, all of a sudden, then I was going in full year-round depression. Next year, got bit again, and I was like, well, I guess I have to take it again. And took it again, and just a whole nother year of year-round depression. So this kind of ended the 11 years, and then I changed my diet to this whole food, unrefined, completely unrefined food. And I'm not saying everybody has to eat as strict as we did, but within 2 weeks, my depression went away. After 11 years of struggling with this, it was absolutely amazing. It changed my life. I felt so good. Not only was I not depressed, actually, maybe I'll say it at the end, but, well, I'll just say it now. My migraines went away. My achy joints went away. My gallbladder issues went away. I wouldn't get hangry anymore before a meal. Sometimes right before the meal, my hypoglycemia, I wouldn't have these blood sugar crashes before a meal. It was amazing. I could go on and on. Maybe I think I put a list in here somewhere, but I don't know if we'll go over that or not. But it literally changed my life. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And now I'm 44, and like I said last night, I feel better at 44 than I did when I was 16 or 18 years old. I have more energy than I used to. It just changed my life. And now, one of the things people think about, we talked about bacteria, and what is the most popular thing people will tell you to do for good gut bacteria? Take a probiotic. I want to look at some research on that for a moment. Now, typically people say if you've had an antibiotic, go and take some probiotics afterward to help re-inoculate your gut with the good gut bacteria. So they've actually done research on this. Probiotics are beneficial bacteria and are often suggested as a way to help recolonize your gut after having a course of antibiotics. The journal Cell reports on research where they tried 3 different options with patients after going through a course of antibiotics. One group would have a personal fecal sample, poop. You go to the bathroom. So before you would get the antibiotics, they would take some of your own feces. Before the antibiotics were administered, they would then have the feces reimplanted back in the person after they would go through the whole course of antibiotics. Now, there's 2 ways that you could potentially do that. So this is called a fecal microbiota transplant. There's 2 options of doing it. So you take your feces, in this case, or sometimes you take it from somebody else with really good gut bacteria. And there's 2 options with it. Either they can do an enema and shoot it back up your rectum again, or the other option is they can put it in pills and you can swallow it down. Which one sounds better? Neither sounds very nice, right? Neither sounds great to me, but yeah. So what did they find? A second group would take probiotics, bacteria within pills. The final group would do nothing after the antibiotics. So they're all taking antibiotics, but here's the three different groups in the study. And what happened? The group that did the fecal microbiome transplant recovered in around 2 days. Their bacteria is fully back to normal in about 2 days after either taking through a pill or rectally putting back up through an enema their own former feces from before the antibiotics. And the second best group was the group that did nothing. The group that did the worst were the ones who took the probiotics. They took something like months, something like 6 months to get back to normal, taking probiotics. Now that is not what you expected me to say, right? You come to a gut-brain connection seminar and you're thinking, I'm going to tell you, go to the store and get some probiotics, right? And but actually, I'm not really persuaded that's the best way to do it because of the research. Now, I used to think that, like everybody else did, right? Now, The Lancet, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, The Lancet reports on a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial with 298 patients with severe acute pancreatitis. 152 people were given probiotics, the bacteria pill in pill form, and 144 were given a placebo. And 9 of the people who took the placebo died in the study, while 24 people who took the probiotics died. Yeah, that's pretty crazy, isn't it? So, yeah, okay, then you might be thinking, if not in pills, where should we get the good bacteria for our gut? Where should we get it? You said it, right? You answered it right here. You don't have to go pay $50, $100, $200 from the special pill from the special YouTube doctor, right? Buy my pills. Those are the only ones that work, right? Well, it turns out God has put in these foods the good bacteria that you need, but then God put in that food the food for the bacteria, which are called prebiotics. The fiber, they're called prebiotics. And as the probiotics, the bacteria eat the prebiotics, the fiber, they give off what researchers call postbiotics, which are those, it's getting kind of funny over here, isn't it? Yeah, you're laughing. Like, all right, how many more words are we going to get into? They end up giving the byproduct called the short-chain fatty acids, things like butyrate. Those are the side effect, and what they do is they lower inflammation, as Fadia talked about, which makes sense why my knees were feeling better. Some of you probably heard of Tom Brady, considered one of the greatest football players, probably the greatest quarterback in history. And he came down here to Florida, and didn't he, at the end of his career, right? Okay, then you should certainly, if you're at least into sports, which I'm not a big fan of sports, but I know about him because my dad is, and he loves Tom Brady. But you may have heard Tom Brady ate a very high plant diet to keep lower inflammation. Do you think it worked for him? Well, it seemed like it did. He was able to play until he was, 40-some years old. I mean, almost nobody plays until they're, mid-40s or whatever in NFL football. You're just too broken. But he was very particular with his diet so that he would have the ability to keep going forward.
For the ones that were not here yesterday,
yes,
we can eat that and be healthier, but no butter and no oil.
Well, it's not a sin to eat oil. It's not a sin to eat it. I'm not saying that. It's just that if you're looking to lose weight, oil is the most weight-gaining food there is. So if you're looking to lose weight, you'll lose it faster, and actually you will often find the inflammation is significantly better when you don't have the refined. Yes, and the bacteria, that's the thing. That doesn't mean don't eat nuts and don't eat olives. So this is the way I think of it. There are certain foods that are like, junk food is just bad. We all kind of know, like a Twinkie. Nobody thinks, except for hospitals maybe, that a Twinkie would be a health food, right? I say that because you go to hospitals and they have their menu, and the menu is like garbage food, and it says like heart-healthy menu. And you look at it and you're like, nobody on earth believes this is a heart-healthy menu except the hospital. But that's beside the point, nevertheless. So there's certain foods that we all know are just junk food. And then there's foods that are like, okay, better than junk food would, be chicken and beef and whatever. And then you go, better than that are plant foods. But better than that are, which, might involve some oil or whatever, but if you're looking at the healthiest absolute foods, you're looking at whole unrefined plant foods. That's the apex of the chain of health. And it makes sense because that's what God gave in the very beginning. That you see that God gave that in the beginning, knowing that it would be good not only in the beginning, but that it would be beneficial throughout time. And so you can get the olive oil, guess where? In the olive, right? I mean, so if you want the apex, you'd get the oil in the olive or whatever. So that we're just talking about specifically the apex there. Now, here's an old quote on what I call the prescription for sickness. This is quite powerful. It says, in many cases of sickness, the very best remedy is for the patient to fast for a meal or two. You probably heard these days a lot of people talking about fasting. Have you heard about it's become more and more popular? I mean, obviously it was done throughout human history. It's kind of a religious experience. Most religions have, right now we're in the middle of Ramadan, we're toward the beginning of Ramadan, which isn't quite a fast because they eat all night. You can eat all night, but you're just not supposed to be eating during the day for the Muslims. But many cultures would have full fasts where you just drink water. Some people would even do water-less fast, but I wouldn't suggest that. But fasting can be very beneficial. It can help reset your gut. If you have indigestion, you have terrible gas or stomach pain, often just going for a 24-hour fast can just reset your gut and you start digesting much better afterward. The gas goes down, the indigestion goes down. Sometimes even your pain will go away. Sometimes arthritic pain will go away. I don't mean it'll eternally go away by a fast, but it will temporarily go away until you find out often what's causing your problem. It could be mold, as Fadia mentioned. It could be junk food. It could be inflammatory foods in the diet. Any of those things could do it. But I'm getting off the point. But fasting, so you could try to fast for a meal or two. It says that the overworked organs of digestion may have an opportunity to rest. Then a fruit diet, temporarily, a fruit diet for a few days has often brought great relief to brain workers. Many times a short period of entire abstinence from food, followed by simple moderate eating, has led to recovery through nature's own recuperative effort. An abstemious or a simple diet for a month or two would convince many sufferers that the path of self-denial is the path to health. So we're going to get back. I'm going to review what this says in just a moment. I should have done it right after this, but I have other slides here. So another thing that can help your gut is exercise. Multiple studies have revealed that exercise can increase the diversity and number of health-promoting bacteria in the gut. So not only eating, and I didn't clarify, an apple has 100 million bacteria in and on it, but the bacteria that's in and on an apple is different than the bacteria that's on a pear. And that's different than what you might find on kale. And what has really very strangely different, in a good way, bacteria are on grapes. And so you may say, okay, do I have to write those down? No. It means eating a diversity of plants will give you a diversity of bacteria. So these children who have less diversity, they can add different fruits and vegetables to their diet, and then they get more diversity, and often they're not going to be as cranky or unhappy and what have you, as we said. So exercise, strangely enough, can also add bacteria to your gut, which is fascinating. And we're told exercise aids the dyspeptic by giving the digestive organs a healthy tone. Now, this is just a review of the quote that I showed, that long quote about fasting. So you could try. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you probably don't want to fast. Or if you're on insulin for type 2 diabetes or some medication that could give you trouble, then it's probably not wise to fast. But for your average person, if you're healthy, you could try it. No pressure, but often people feel amazing. One of the men who came here the other night, he told me he had done a 22-day water fast. That's pretty impressive. Now, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't be here probably anymore if I did a 22-day water fast. So that's not for me. A day or two is about enough for me. I'm not looking to lose any more weight. But it feels great often. People find that their mind is sharper, their energy escalates, their sleep is incredible. If you have insomnia, fasting 1 or 2 days a week, for many people, that will cure your insomnia. So it's amazing what fasting can do. So then, if you want to rebalance your gut, you could try fasting one time, and then you could eat more whole fruits. Many people say, but Chad, don't fruits spike the blood sugar? This is a study from the British Medical Journal, and anything above this line is increasing blood sugar. But there's this range here. So some people, it actually lowers their blood sugar, a cantaloupe. But for some, for a small amount, it actually causes a spike. So melons, you know, if you're prone to diabetes, you might notice a blood sugar spike. But for half the people, it won't do it. Strawberries, for most people, it lowers their blood sugar, or it lowers their chances of having type 2 diabetes. Oranges lower it more. Peaches, plums, and apricots, even more. Grapefruit, more. Bananas, more. Apples and pears, more. Prunes. Now, prunes lower it even more. Now, prunes, a dried fruit, is specifically a dried plum. Notice that a fresh plum, actually a dried plum, a prune, here it is even more beneficial potentially for a diabetic than even the fresh one. Then you come to grapes and raisins. They're each equally beneficial, and blueberries are just amazing for helping lower the risk of type 2 diabetes. So many people are afraid of fruit, thinking, oh, it's got sugar in it. But in fact, in general, it lowers your risk of type 2 diabetes. And so you eat more fruit. You could even go on a few days on a fruit diet if you want to try it. That's actually, it was a fruit diet that reversed my depression. I don't just live on fruit, but I did for a short while, and it was amazing. I felt like an absolute champion. And now I eat more whole grains. Now, if you can handle gluten, that's fine. But if you can't, avoid gluten. That's fine. Not a problem at all. You could have, oatmeal or other well-cooked grains if you're gluten-free. You could have things like amaranth, or you could have teff, or you could have quinoa.
You said chia.
Yeah, you can have chia. Yeah, you can have chia. So you can have all of these different things. So you don't have to have gluten. For those, meaning I do great with gluten. Like I said, my wife doesn't. She avoids it. So if you can't eat it, don't. If you can, you might be like me. I feel fantastic with it. So also eat more whole vegetables. And when I say whole, that doesn't have to mean raw. You can cook them. We just mean you're not taking the sugar out of the sweet potato. You're eating the sweet potato. That's what I mean. So obviously, we had sweet potatoes for lunch today, and obviously we did cook them. And now I'm going to share with you some research later on this, but spicy food can cause indigestion, and we'll talk more about that in the future. So if you've got gut issues, especially, I would avoid spicy food, but we'll talk more about it later. And eat a handful of nuts a day. You don't need any more than a handful. I mean, if you're real thin, you can handle a couple handfuls a day. And if you go on a plant-based diet, B12 is advisable to take. Anybody the age of 50 years old, anybody, it suggests that anybody, no matter what, if you're on a meat-based or a plant-based diet, over the age of 50, you should be taking B12 from time to time. And my grandfather was a meat eater his entire life, and he was B12 deficient. And so he had to take B12 shots, but you can just take a pill most of the time. But his got so low, he would regularly have to take the B12 shot. Now, I'm going to share with you something very, very fascinating. This is one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. This is absolutely amazing. This is the true story of the Victor Valley Medium Community Correctional Facility in Adelanto, California. This is the longest name they could have thought of for a prison. And what they did, I know of the man personally. I met his son. I've seen the guy, but I've just talked with his son. His name is Terry Moreland. He's a multimillionaire out of California. He's a Seventh-day Adventist businessman, and he wanted to help start a prison that would be a true correctional facility. Because most prisons, though they're called correctional facility, it's a misnomer. Most people become worse after going there. You learn the tricks of the trade. It's like a trade school for the worst things in the world, right? You get together and you're like, oh, that's how you get away with that, okay? And next time, maybe you'll try to avoid getting caught again. But obviously, some people's lives have changed, but very few. And so this man, Terry Moreland, got a contract with the state of California with what's called the CDC, but not the one you're thinking of. This is the California Department of Corrections. And he was given a contract for a 500-inmate prison in California. And they split the prison literally into two sides. One side would go on a plant-based diet. and the other one would be kind of on a meat-based diet. And now, one of the government workers, when they told them they were going to do this, one of the government workers said, no way. No way. These guys would rather burn the place to the ground than go on a plant-based diet. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we'll give them the choice. We'll give them the choice. They get to choose what side they want to go on. And so they were allowed to choose between something called the New Start Health Program of a vegan diet, occupational training, Bible studies, and anger management classes, or the meat-based side. And how many of these criminals do you think of their own volition chose to go on this plant-based diet? Well, it turns out it was 85% of them chose to go vegan. Wow. That means only 15% of them were like, nah, I just want my meat. So they went on the meat-based side. Now, they actually didn't have enough room for all of them to go on the plant-based side. So they had to have a waiting list to get on the plant-based side. And now there's a statistical measure in society, our government. When you go into prison, you become a statistic. And when you get out of prison, you are, in a sense, watched for the rest of your life. I mean, I know you can get off parole and all this stuff. You can be done with this. But you're always watched to know, do you go back? And if you go back, there's something called the recidivism rate. So, for instance, let's say 100 people go to prison. When they finally get out, 70 of them go back to prison. That would be a 70% recidivism rate. 70% recommitting a crime rate. That's what it would be. Well, at the time that Terry Moreland was running this prison in California, there was a recidivism rate of 95%. What does that mean? That means when 100 people got out of prison, within several years, 95% of them would commit another crime and have to go back to prison. And who knows, maybe the other 5% just didn't get caught. You know? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure some of them were truly changed. Maybe they gave their life to Christ or something and they were truly changed, but most everybody was going back. Well, what happened while Terry Moreland was running this prison, the recidivism rate went from 95% all the way down to 2%. The average in the United States at that is around 51% recidivism rate, so it was quite terrible back then. Now, this was absolutely amazing. So, almost 100% reversal. Almost everybody who went to prison wouldn't go back after this. As they changed their lifestyle, they changed their diet. Now, what have we found so far happens in people when they change their diet like this? Inflammation lowers, they become happier. What are they less likely to go back to? Not only the crime, but what else? Addictions. Because often crimes are connected with addictions, right? Sometimes it's, crime because of alcohol, or they're struggling with drugs, so they begin to steal or this or that or what have you. But these people, 90-some% of them were totally transformed by going through this experience. And we are told in an amazing book called Ministry of Healing, it says wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food. Who would have guessed this could be? Wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food are in no small degree responsible for the intemperance and crime and wretchedness that curse the world. This is fascinating. Now, you know what they did? You know what the state of California did? They as they were seeing lives change, people in other prisons in California were asking to be transferred to this particular prison. And so you know what they ended up doing? They shut this prison down.
That sounds right for California.
He said, that sounds about right for California, he said. Now, here's the thing. And I interviewed one of the men who helped start this prison, because my wife and I, as I've showed you video clips from the documentaries we've made, I interviewed one of the men. His name was Richard Bland. This man helped start it. This man marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And he showed me a picture. He's like, that's me right there. I'm the one right behind Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, I'm the only person in this picture that's still alive. And there's two reasons. Number one, he wasn't killed. And number two, he ate a super healthy diet. So he's lived for a very long time. And so he was a part of helping start this prison, Richard Bland. And you used to be able to watch video. There were 2 videos, like 2 short documentaries on YouTube about this prison. And you could watch the people in there. And because typically, and this is not a good thing, but typically in prisons, people divide all up into their ethnic backgrounds. You got like you got the Asian gang, you got like the black gang, you got the white guys, you know, and they're all like, typically they're divided up into groups to kind of protect each other. But in this prison, you'd watch the documentary, and the guys literally, this is one of the guys on there, he's like, you know, normally people are all divided up into their different ethnicities or whatever, but he's like, we just all in here praising the Lord together. And you're like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And he said, normally you're afraid when you go to bed that somebody might knife you in the night, but he's like, nobody's worried about that here. They said, we all respect each other. And even the guards, they don't call us inmate, they would call us Brother John or whatever. And it just totally changed these people's lives. You used to be able to go watch those videos on YouTube, but those videos were taken down. And so you can't watch the video anymore either. But yes. Yes, they were telling their families on the outside about what happened in their lives. So it was changing their diet, changing the lifestyle, and even their families on the outside were being transformed. And but sadly, like I said, it was shut down. And the reason I'm told it was shut down, because prisons, from what I understand, are big business. And in business, the best way to be successful is to have repeat customers. And the sad thing is, what if we would have gone in America from one of the most incarcerated nations in the world to maybe one of the least incarcerated nations in the world?
He was helping them on the outside.
Yes, and the strange thing is, and what they did, from what I understand, their excuse for shutting it down, they said Terry Moreland was taking the money from collect phone calls. And they said that was a violation, so they shut the whole thing down. But you know what he was doing with the money he was making? This guy was rich. He didn't even need the money. What he was doing with the money, he was running this thing cheaper than the government could run it. And then he was taking the money and he was helping people get houses when they got out of prison. And help them get jobs when they got out of prison. So the idea that he was taking collect call, I mean, it was just they found maybe he was taking that money and helping them get houses on the outside. It was just ridiculous, you can imagine. But sadly, the place shut down. And, I was told that the place just collapsed and that potentially years later they asked him to restart it again. But I think he's a busy man and he thought, you could just snatch it out from under me in a moment. I wish he would have done it again, but sadly it didn't happen. It could have changed the world. It could have changed the prison systems around the world. But, I share these things with you.
You can do it.
Maybe. Yes. The reason I share these things, I'm the least likely person to eat the way I'm teaching you about. My favorite food was pork growing up, ribs. And I would laugh at anybody on a plant-based diet or whatever, but it's changed my life so much that I'm not embarrassed about it. And I'm not forcing anybody to do it. I'm a big believer in freedom of choice. I'm a big believer that people get to make their own decisions. And anybody that tries to force their lifestyle on somebody else, it's, number one, it's not attractive. It's straight up annoying. But I share it too because it changed my life. And you might find, I don't expect that everybody's going to go immediately live this lifestyle. But if you were like I used to be, where you hardly ate any fruits and vegetables and you never ate whole grains, which was me, maybe you could start adding 1 or 2 or 3 and start noticing some benefits, like we showed on that chart. You start adding a little more, and then you're like, hey, this is... Now, once again, if you only add 1 or 2, you might not notice a big difference. And if you're not used to it, you might actually want to start a little slow, because some people, if they're not used to eating any fiber, they eat a bunch of it, and all of a sudden they have a ton of gas, and they're like, oh boy, this isn't nice. I don't like that. Because your body doesn't have enough of the bacteria ready, so you start adding a little on and a little on, and then in time you can handle it. And not only can you handle it, you just feel phenomenal. So something to consider, make small progressive changes, and I think you'll find some of the same benefits that I have. We'll close with a prayer, and then I'll show you the upcoming messages for coming up. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. Lord, thank you for what this has done in my life, helping reverse the depression, the achy joints, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar issues, and just asthma, allergies, I mean, it just all kinds of things. Thank you for the blessing it's been to me. And maybe if there's somebody else here that would find, maybe there's somebody struggling with depression like I did, and they could find some of these same benefits. Although we saw the other things earlier this week, there's other factors in depression. We looked at exercise, sunlight, rest, all of these things. We thank you for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.